My pleasure now is to introduce Carl Carter from IRI Worldwide. For any of you that don't know IRI, I massively recommend it. You know, if you're working in the retail FMCG space, this is a company that can attribute your various different media, split out by category, and show you what the ROI is delivering. And I think that's, you know, back to some of Leonard's points, it's one of the hardest things to do, but certainly one of the most valuable for the brand. And Carl is going to talk to us about brand success.
So obviously today it's about AI, and I wanted to pull that back into brand marketing, which is very close to our heart. So as Pete says, we work mainly in FMCG, so a lot of fast-moving consumer goods, and there's a lot of theories around what you should be doing when you've got a brand that's that big. And is anyone familiar with Byron Sharp? Just raise your hands quickly. Ooh, quite a few people. Excellent. So if we take Byron Sharp theories, fundamentally all brands want to grow. Okay, it's not a revelation. If they want to make more money, they have to grow. And how do they do that? It's through a couple of things. But what does brand growth give us? Well, the bigger you are, the more staying power you have. You have loyalty, you've got economies of scale, and ultimately those give you all the powers that you can leverage to get more consumers into your brands. The other thing is actually, to do that, you need to drive penetration. And penetration is ultimately get more people who aren't buying your brand to buy your brand. And there are two key factors, which we mentioned a second ago, that do that. So one of them is about this idea of mental availability. So to you and I, this is basically advertising and reaching new consumers and new audiences, and also maintaining the existing ones to a certain degree. And this idea really is where advertising comes into play. And underpinning that is this idea about physical availability, and that is you have to have a product in a store or online, in a virtual store or e-commerce. Otherwise, people can't buy it. It's a pretty simple principle. Put the two things together, and what do you get? You get purchases. Unfortunately, brands haven't done a very good job of getting it right. So what are the things that they've got wrong? Well, one of those is trade expenditure. So you'll probably notice as you walk into most retail stores in the UK versus a number of countries, everything's on promotion. Week by week, we all know that if you're going to go buy your yogurts, actually, chances are you'll probably switch from Rachel's to Waitrose Own to another brand week by week, or you'll just wait until your favorite products are on promotion and you'll buy them. And that cycle and that stockpiling is a big challenge, and actually, it's just not profitable. The other thing is excessive SKUs. Okay, if you go into most retailers, and this is really where discounters have done a great job, there's not that many SKUs. Whereas if you go into Tesco's, most of the brands have entered into the market with so many SKUs that actually they cannibalize their core product line, and that really hasn't done a very good job. And the other one, not to discount, obviously, LoopMe and partners here today, but new digital tech. There is an impetus within the marketplace, and especially within consumer goods. The second they see the latest tech, they are overwhelmed by the potential, and obviously what they want to do is spend all their money on making that work. And unfortunately, often it doesn't work because it's unproven. And the next one, which we call it low-quality ad content. Internally, we call it shit tent. You can use that term. We haven't copyrighted it. And the idea here is that actually there's so many channels now. There's so much diversity that actually all you do is you produce so much content, and without any purpose, you just send that across as many channels as possible. And of course, actually, that doesn't translate into someone really receiving the message well and actually going, yeah, I'm going to buy your brand, or actually, I believe in your brand. And lastly, it's about developing new channels. So what brands don't do is developing the people necessarily to align to those channels and what's happening in the marketplace to really grow their capabilities internally. So there's two things you can look at here. Is one, does the market respond? So all of us in this room with our skill sets, should we be responding and doing a better job with them? Absolutely. But equally, FMCGs need to have those people internally. If they don't, we can't probably have those conversations effectively with them because it's quite challenging. So that's what they did wrong. What does this all mean? Let's get into some context, and I'll explain why I'm really going to talk about AI and where I think it fits. So this here is about spend of advertising for the last, from 2010 to 2017. Now, the reality here is what I want to prove to you and show you is this world is very, very confused. It doesn't know where to spend its money, and it's trying to spend it in so many places just to work out what's the right thing to do, okay? And why is it doing it? Because it wants to grow its brand. What you can actually see here, the light blue, is TV spend over time. Now, it was pretty consistent because it was one of very few channels. You can see the colored bars. And actually, over time, it's fluctuated. Now, what's most interesting for me is 2017, we saw the lowest spend on TV that we'd ever seen. Now, if you look at 58%, though, versus the peaks, the 73, 75%, actually what's included in that is also broadcast VOD, so that's all for ITV player. Now, some could argue it's still just TV, but it is the digital format of those television stations. So we have to pay attention to the fact, A, it's declined, and B, some of that is shifted into digital formats. Also to note on that, out-of-home and digital also increased significantly over time. Now, if we deep dive a little bit into digital spend, this is where it gets equally interesting. Once upon a time, the digital version of TV, I guess, was display. And if you look, display's actually declined significantly over the years now, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. But actually, it hasn't. In reality, it's changed formats. And all it's done is it's shifted into the realms of social, the realms of mobile, into online video. So it's actually a slightly misleading story. But what is interesting is that, again, that diversification, as it splits and spreads, okay? This is the whole point. This is why bad content's going out. This is why FMCG brands don't know what to do, because it's just too much. It's overwhelming for them to deal with this. So if we look at consumers and how they spend their time, really, again, this is back to that point that we know that they're spending a lot of time across a range of channels and mediums. Now, in particular, TV there is only about 40%. Now, that is actually a significant decline from where it was, say, 5, 6 years ago. And if you look across the right-hand side there, that's a big split. We're still spending over 60% of our time on traditional channels. But again, it's creeping up now. And I'm going to show you some examples of why I think we really need to pay attention. And again, I promise you, I will deliver a message about AI. Keep the faith, please. So, efficiency and effectiveness. I need to talk about this. It's really important. So, when brands try and grow, they do that set in the context of one thing, and that is spending as little as possible to get as much as possible. And that's where this principle comes in. So the reason I did it as a balance point is because they want to get both. And actually, is it easy to do that? No, it's absolutely not. So effectiveness, for all of you in the room who aren't familiar with sort of the consumer goods world, it's volumetric. It's all about how many units do I sell. So I want to get as many units as I can. Nice big volume, big box there. But actually, I want to do it as efficiently as possible. And efficiency is ROI. Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot to do that. So they want a bit of this and they want a bit of that. It's actually really difficult to get. And this is where this role of AI, I think, starts to come in. Okay? How do we use these data points to try and balance this really difficult cycle or balance and tipping point where we can still be effective and still remain efficient? Yeah? And as Leonard showed us earlier, if you start to look at a lot of those metrics that go into that model, those are the things that can help us decide how we do that. And I really thought it was worth calling this out against the numbers. So I showed you some spend, and now I'm going to show you what happens when you talk about efficiency and effectiveness by channel. So what you can see, the light blue is your efficiency measure, okay? So that is ROI. And your dark blue is what we call effectiveness, which ultimately is contribution. So how much of the brand's value did it create? And actually, what you can see here is TV is still doing both very, very well, okay? And as you get to the digital channels, actually, from an ROI perspective, they're all pretty decent and they're all pretty consistent. However, they're not quite as effective as TV is. Well, significantly under effective. However, for those who in the room like loads of numbers on a chart like this and looked at the top, what you can see, though, is if you look at the index of spend, TV takes a significant portion of the spend. Okay? So when we start to talk about efficiency and effectiveness and balancing and then think about that as a media plan, ultimately, the truth is, if all the money's going to TV, you're pretty much got a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's, I think, what we're seeing. And I want to show you some stats. So never was it more true to show this idea of the change in what's happening, certainly in TV, and why I think this will change over time. So if you look to the left-hand side, you can see these are TV audience viewing figures on Christmas Day. And if you look there, we actually peaked in 1989 at Crocodile Dundee. Call that a knife, mate? If anyone's Australian, I'm really sorry. In my head, it was perfect. And then Only Fools and Horses came close to that. And then actually in 2017, it pretty much just got as good as Call the Midwife. And in 2018, not even Michael McIntyre, look at that little face, he couldn't even do it, couldn't rouse up the figures because it was the lowest on record. Okay? So let's start to think about that context. And why is this? You know, as I said, TV is representing so much of the spend at this point in time, and you've got consumers spending a lot of time away from television consuming, you know, subscription video on demand, social channels, and I think this is the challenge. Until we start shifting the spend and putting more data in and more spending to get more data out, it's really hard to get to an answer that's actually going to make an impact or change the business. And I really do believe this statement, history cannot dictate the future when the future is not like the past. This is the fourth industrial revolution. This is digitization of the world, and we're seeing it throughout everything that we do. And so ultimately, it's throwing up so many data points, okay? And I really want to call this out. So this is now the point of AI. If you look at these key areas here, these are things that I discuss, talk about every day. When you take Byron Sharp's theories, these are actually the things underneath that you can lever and play with to actually be more effective in a campaign. So whether it's creative, whether it's the audience, whether it's the physical number of people that you reach, all the way through to the frequency in which you advertise. What is the optimum frequency, even by audience, by creative? Okay? Think of all these data points. Imagine you multiply all these up together. Per campaign, per store visit, per purchase, week by week, day by day, hour by hour. Yeah, you see how big these things start to get. And the last one there is sales funnel. How do people go through that sales funnel and how do you influence them? And I think this is really, for me, this is the case for AI, is how do we take those data points and pull it all together and pull meaningful insight out to make better decisions on the fly.
Let's grab a seat. So obviously you've worked with over 100 brands across Europe and, go ahead.
Then let's see it.
And over 100 brands across Europe. And, you know, you mentioned here a lot of the different things that you're seeing, but what is it that the brands say to you that they want? Because I know it can be a confusing question even on their side.
It's a good question. I mean, everything is usually the beginning of that. The reality is, though, that they're really interested in the path to purchase. Right now, if you start to think about the sales funnel, it's a real challenge for a consumer brand when there's mass competitors, mass channels, to actually influence a consumer, A, across the journey, but also at the right point, because to intersect a competitor or to intersect a moment when they actually might buy a product is actually hugely difficult. And I do think, again, that's where better understanding of how that funnel breaks down is really important. And they've been asking that for probably about 6-7 years now.
Right, and I mean, you just mentioned it there, but is that with that volume of data that's available where AI can come in and make the difference? And you know, is that where you see it having the biggest impact?
I think so, yeah. So I think, again, if you start to take all those different points and inputs, you know, AI has this ability to take masses of data and just learn and see and take the inputs and say to itself, okay, when I see this, it correlates with that. Okay, I'll stick that to one side. That's one of my models. Then you take another output and says, well, actually, this has no correlation. Put that to one side. And all you do is you build these layers over time. And if you do that at every single stage, from awareness to consideration through to intent, actually you can start to build that out as a really detailed piece to start to influence, well, where should I be spending my money? Who with? What creative type should I serve? And actually it will be, I mean, I think I do see a vision where there'll be, you know, platforms like LoopMe will take that data and physically we just have a bank of content that's produced. And actually even the content will be dynamically produced at some point, and it will just be saying, here are 5 components for a good ad that we know based on the data, and I'm going to pull those 5 things together because that guy there, he's in the right moment to buy. He tomorrow is going to buy a car. Probably not the yogurt, it's an extreme example, but he's going to buy a car. Let's talk to him about the right model.
Yeah, we've got a big telco client that we're working on at the minute, and the project is to put 100 different pieces of creative together and allow the data to tell which of their 10 audiences has been most influenced by that creative. And that's the reason on Leonard's side, you know, you have 500 to 1,500 models. It's finding those little nuances that make the difference. Do you think, though, I mean, with all this data, there's also a risk of analysis paralysis?
Yeah, So genuinely, I work with a lot of clients, and when Pete says over 100 brands across Europe, it's probably growing day by day. They all suffer from analysis paralysis. So if anyone is familiar with the industry, so they use a lot of things like econometrics and marketing mix models. Now, typically, these things spit out results 12 months later. Now, 12 months after everything's happened, it's pretty hard to take those results and put them into play. And they're also incredibly detailed. And actually, that causes a load of confusion. But with so much data out there today that we never used to have, there's this high expectation from C-levels. When I go visit clients, they hear words like AI, machine learning, and they say, well, we've got billions of data points, and there's a guy over there I know went to Athens University who knows AI, so let's go find the answers. And unfortunately, that puts a great expectation on everyone below to basically create all the answers. And actually, they do end up doing nothing. And 5 years ago, we launched a product which, for me, was, it was a much faster product. It was a more directional-based piece of analysis, but it became really popular in market because actually what it did was it stopped that. And it said to people, actually, within 2 weeks, I'm going to tell you the answer, and I'm going to tell you what it needs you to do. And it's amazing how the second you take that responsibility and accountability away, people become very excited. And actually, of course, it gives them the answer to drive.
It's just that focus, isn't it? It's focusing on what's the most important thing. I mean, we often say, tell us what your one goal is, and then you get, a whole plethora of different things that they want. Slightly different track, but have you started? I think we've all been affected by the rise of direct-to-consumer brands, especially through social media and products you've probably all bought something off Instagram at this stage. Are those new brands teaching the traditional brands anything differently or giving them anything to learn from?
Yeah, there's a bit of a split in the market at the moment, actually, because you've got a lot of challenger brands that are hitting the market. Now, these challenger brands are growing at a substantial rate compared to big brands, and largely because they don't have penetration, so they can obviously low base to grow. But they tend to be leading the way because they don't have big budgets for TV. They get really clever, and so they have to employ technology and platforms to do the work for them. And then on the flip side, you do also have big brands. So I was with a big brand yesterday doing some brand debriefs, and what was interesting to me in the room was where I once sat with a media manager, an insights manager, and obviously all the brand guys. I was actually sat in a room now with probably 4 or 5 extra people, and they were digital content studio, they were digital performance managers, and there were all these roles that have developed internally to basically handle this idea that there is a funnel, we need to execute across it, but we don't have any skills and expertise in how to do that. And that's where they're employing those people. So I think finally brands are waking up and they're slowly doing that. Whether they're doing it particularly well at this point, I still think there's a role for all of us in this room to do a better job at making sure that even if they do employ those people, they get up to speed pretty quick.
It almost goes back to the earlier point about machines taking our jobs. Actually, they just create new jobs. There's more ways to interpret the data, and there's different things we can actually spend our time doing. Yeah. If, we've got a great audience here of people from brands directly and also from agencies. If you could give them a piece of advice from your experience, what would you say to them?
I think it's really simple, honestly. It's don't forget the key marketing principles and things like Byron Sharp. Whether him and Mark Ritson don't fully agree is a debate for another day, but those principles are really, really true. Reach is still important, but reach with the right audience and driving penetration is key. So if you get those core ingredients right, and then just think about your campaign. When you start that campaign, what is the KPI that you are looking for? Because the number of times either the KPI hasn't been thought out, or the KPI changes halfway through the campaign because people they weren't clear. But actually as well, there's so much that goes on. So many points, so many executions, creatives. By the time campaigns launch, most of the time, I think the KPI has been forgotten, even though it might have been right in the first place. So get that right. And when you blend together proper, strong marketing objectives, this is what our strategy is for the brand, not in a short period of time, but in a longer period of time, and you get the KPIs right. Pulling those things together, and again, I think, this is the role for AI. If you feed those things in to the AI model, as well as the live campaign metrics, what you should get to is a better outcome. Now, even if that outcome is better by 2%, in the world that I'm in, 2% on a consumer brand is worth millions, if not billions, in some cases. So, if anyone tells you 2% isn't good enough, I can tell you 2% can be extraordinary.
I think that was one of the points that was highlighted at your Growth Summit earlier this year, which we were
Yeah.
one of the few tech partners to attend. I think you mentioned that when you get your initial responses back, whatever that, if it's 2%, that could actually have a 3 times multiplier over the course of 12 months. And Carl and I were speaking, and we realized that IRI are one of our partners that help us to deliver the ROI results when we use purchase loop sales, but we felt that we could go further and actually develop that relationship more, because we know, as we've seen, traditional media and TV is amazing at building awareness, but we can use digital to build incrementality on top of that. But it's from the consideration and the purchase stage, what we know that digital really starts to pull away from TV, and we can track it and we can verify it. So what we're working on releasing now, and this is definitely early stages because it started last week, but with IRI, we want to build in market and globally a live optimization to that ROI. So at the moment, we can optimize the ROI while the campaign is running. We want to make it quicker and faster so we can take all of those data points that IRI are collecting from their various different routes, drive them into our platform and give them to Leonard's team, and mean that we can identify the creative or the data point or the individual element that's going to drive the best outcome. So I'm really excited to announce that, and hopefully we've got a bit of work ahead of us going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're excited too. I mean, we've been talking now for 3-4 years about all this great data that we sit on, and we've got great analysts. We've got 250 people sitting in Athens who are PhDs in maths and stats, but it doesn't come to life until you partner with someone who's executing against the outcome and the end goal. And I think that's what's really exciting for us. And we know the importance of the funnel. Like I say, for 6-7 years now, I think I've sat in a number of rooms where people have said, can you answer that question for me? And I'm like, I can answer part of it.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to answer more of those questions.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you having you here.
Thank you.
It's a huge pleasure.